Hey everyone, welcome. For those of you who don't know, my name is Mark America. I'm a professor of art and art history and also the founding director of a new practice-based PhD program in intermedia art, writing, and performance in the new College of Media, Communication, and Information. And we're really happy to have, as our inaugural event for the Visiting Artist Series this semester, Amaranth Borsuk. And I just wanted to very briefly make give a couple of thank yous out there, and then let you know of 3 other programs that will be happening this semester. First, I'd like to thank the CNCI, the college, and Dean Lori Bergen for generously sponsoring this event. I'd also like to thank my wonderful colleague from Creative Writing, Julie Carr, for helping facilitate this event. And I'd also like to thank the program assistant for IEWP, Melanie Clemens. On September 27th, we'll have a visiting artist presentation by Allison Parrish, who's a computer programmer, poet, educator, and game designer who lives in Brooklyn, and whose teaching and practice address the unusual phenomena that blossom when language and computers meet. On October 26th, that'll be in the environmental design building in the garage, and that'll be co-sponsored by the Information Science Department from CMCI. On October 26th, in the basement auditorium in the Visual Arts Complex, that's a Wednesday night at 7 p.m., we're going to welcome Trevor Paglin, a New York-based artist whose work deliberately blurs lines between science, contemporary art, journalism, and other disciplines to construct unfamiliar yet meticulously researched ways to see and interpret the world around us. And some of his newest work, which focuses on the geography and aesthetics of the NSA's global surveillance programs, is the subject of an exhibition at Metro Pictures, if you're familiar with that gallery in New York City. And then our last visiting artist presentation of this semester will be by the amazing Ralph Lemon. This is on November 2nd, also Wednesday night, 7 o'clock in the Visual Arts Complex, also facilitated by Julie Carr. Ralph is a choreographer, a conceptualist, a director, writer, and installation artist who's the artistic director of Cross Performance. And one can easily say that he develops intellectually rigorous and experimental performances that are as socially and politically resonant as they are personal. But for now, I'd like to introduce Natalie for her reading, and then we're going to introduce Anna. Thank you, guys.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the first installment of the Creative Writing Reading Series for the 2016-2017 academic year. As was mentioned, I'll be doing a brief reading of some of my own work, and then doing a brief introduction of our visiting poet, Amaranth Borsuk, and we'll jump right into her writing from there. This first piece is entitled, Stay Woke, stylized stay/woke. The place I am from is green too. Kudzu arching up tree lines near the flat coast, stones beaten into a road by the river, slave sweat steaming in the grout when it rains. And still stands the ghost of a girl with her white handkerchief on the shore, arms raised, hands up, even as the water grows deep and gray. This city, as any, perched unapologetically on broken backs and bloodied squad cars, its ghost girls turning translucent in sunlight, white stems smoking in their chalky teeth, mornings rising unbidden, inevitable. Sometimes I wake to the taste of blood in my teeth, especially on nights when I've kicked and screamed, arrested by the ghost sojourning through the white sclera of stupefaction. The place I am from is green too. Veins etched into every whitewashed building on the south side, this lifeline, this open lot where we congregate around tin drum fires, extract jokes from the lurking ghosts of poverty, where I try to encapsulate the way the woods embrace us like family, if only to rebuke remastered modern misery, a suicide 40 miles east, black man, tree. Tuesday 10. I pull out of the Kingdom Hall parking lot with Schoolboy Q on, feeling ironic or cool or lonely. The road branches off black and blue one way, the other taking its travelers through the quiet bustle of suburban sprawl. I swerve into the night path. The slivers of reverence I have left prevent me from turning the volume up loud enough to hear the bass in the surrounding woods until I've sped a couple of miles away. Tonight my neck feels loose and desperate, sends my head lolling every direction in its losing battle to keep up with endlessly dueling refrains. A compound of dejection, shame, and bloodborne fury has been turning over and over in my bones and brain for months now. The exothermic hopelessness still surprises me sometimes. I take one hand off the wheel, then two, and I imagine this time the tears assaulting my face are blue hot, singeing my chin and burning clean through the lines of my lazy neck. I fix my mouth to scream, yawn instead, put a few fingers back on the wheel, defeated. I'll end up in these trees one day, my hood wrenching in two in earnest, and maybe I'll be surprised then, too. Coaxing paroxysm from the round. 1. Coaxing paroxysm from the round of your wet mouth, my fingers licked the circle of your pinned wrists, and you precipitated into the moment. I'd never felt need pounding through my teeth. You kissed me then, brown rumbling against brown, breast to thundering breast, spinning heads colliding from outstretched necks, and I couldn't imagine you were ever inert. Your hair in my palms was like finally feeling every molecule of the navy velvet night sliding milkily underneath each fingernail, breathing me. 2. There were scars on your arms, and I didn't ask about them, content with the understanding that you allowed me to taste trauma in your skin. I fingered the raised points of your tattoos. See how I'm already writing about you in past tense, trying to leach the salt from your flesh to preserve these memories, looking too intently and for too long. I assume soon my skin too will bubble like you're trying to push through me. Pockets of black ink, the only proof we ever existed. That, and the way my palms ache where you used to press them to your cheeks, smiling, dimpled, like the first hint of an imploding star. In the grand tradition of poets reading from screens. Good evening. I'm delighted to have the honor of introducing our visiting poet tonight, whom I would describe as nothing short of prolific. Amaranth Borsuk is currently an assistant professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington, Hotel, where she also teaches in the MFA in Creative Writing and Poetics. She recently served as Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in Comparative Media Studies and Writing and Humanistic Studies at MIT, where she taught workshops and courses related to poetry's changing media forms from modernism to the present. Our own Julie Carr selected her 2014 collaboration, As We Know, for CU's own Subito Prize, and we continue to hold Borsuk's work in high esteem here at Boulder. Her most recent book of poetry, Pomegranate Eater, was released in April of this year through Corey Press, and features the sort of lexical exploration that makes those of us who find ourselves consumed by words swoon in our seats, or our beds, or under that desk where we get all our reading done. Borsuk's laboratory is in the liminal space between poet and page, and her dedication to collaboration and her experimentation, that rhyming was accidental, has led the likes of C.A. Conrad to place her in the pantheon of American poetry goddesses. At the risk of becoming too purple in my praise, I'll just say, you're in for a treat. Without further ado, I'd like to bring up Amaranth Borsuk.
Thanks, everybody. It's a huge honor to be here, and I'm completely overwhelmed by that introduction and also those amazing poems by Natalie. Thank you as well to Ruchi for all of your last-minute assistance. I'm so grateful to be here and excited to share a variety of work with you tonight. Actually, before we go into the digital, I think I'll start by reading some work off the page. My practice is really diverse. It's going to wake up and then it's going to go to sleep. So I thought I would start by reading some poems from my first book, Handiwork. But since I'm going to do a bunch of different things and sort of be up here for a little while, I want to preface this by saying, like, if you need to do anything to take care of yourself over the course of the next hour, like stretch or bio break or whatever, please don't hesitate or stand on ceremony. Just be comfortable and do what you need for yourself. And I'm really happy to also take questions too, whether during or at the end. I don't know how it normally works with these things. Is there a preferred mode?
However you want to do it. I mean, normally at the end, but we can do it throughout.
All right, so if you have questions, then try and stick around to the end, and I'm happy to chat at great length. And if there is a time, then out of this room in the lobby. So my first book of poems, Handiwork, came out in 2012. And the story of this book is that it took me years and years to write it. My grandmother, every time I visited her, would ask me, why don't you write the stories of how I survived the Second World War? She and her mother were the only people in their family to survive. She had two cousins who survived, whom she later reunited with. And so I grew up hearing these stories of danger and trauma and loss, and I internalized them to such a degree that when I was a child, I used to dream that I was living my grandmother's life in Poland in the time of the Second World War. And for many years, I repressed that. I tried to move away from it, and I didn't realize until college that I had been repressing this trauma that I had inherited. So Handiwork is about trying to write into that space. The problem is that a family story that is penetrated by history is going to be full of holes, and mine is no different than any of yours. The Holocaust is a historic event that impacted so many people. I felt that there was also a kind of inadequacy on my part in approaching it. So the poems of Handiwork try to acknowledge my insufficiency as a writer and both the creative and the destructive work of hands. And I just wanted to read a few poems from this that I don't normally read, because my grandmother, Rena, to whom the book is dedicated, passed away in June. And so I wanted to read some of the poems that are most close to my very literal family history that's very buried in this book. One other thing I should say is, in order to access this kind of very personal material, I ended up having to resort to a number of constraints. Mathematical, gematria-like calculations of syllabics, the use of writing through, where I would take a key word, generally a biblical phrase about salt, and use that to extract language from my grandmother's stories that she wrote about this experience. And then a series of poems about the hand itself, where the hand is a figure for my own hand in its act of creative violence. Adonix for Phinia. Streets of the city filled with a dreadful statische Werkstätte, surely the safest. Phinia, my little, thinking and hoping, innocent, gentle, possibly hurt her. Still see the empty, only an echo. Endless, tremendous, had to go home and. Parents, what happened? Mama was standing. Hundreds of people. Phinia among them. Thin summer dress on. Think of you often. Pleasure and sorrow. Being alive, you. This is Straszna Mama in my very inappropriate Polish. They hid her horrible portrait in the cellar so I would not scream. You are first your mother's, then another man's. We didn't discuss the disappeared. We had seen the wolves firsthand, told we could keep them off, stood hours in basement, wastewater sorting rags from rags, fingers catching cotton, linen, silk. Later, we knit our sweaters into mittens. For pennies and heels we spread with salvaged grief. Salo, smoked swanina. One hard sugar nut each week to satisfy my treble stop. We lived in the wood knot of a tree you couldn't see beyond the road. Some days you read and others listened for a downing, face against the outplace, waiting, knuckles raw against the frame. Black hat, fox collar, skin thin as a... No, her absence terrified me most. We were born twice. We would never be alone. This poem is for Professor Douglas's class and the students who are here. Show of hands. A burden, a dab, a firm, a free, a helping, a swift, an old, at the, of, back, bound, and foot, by his own, by the, of, cap in, climbed over, close at, cold, warm heart, first, from, to, got her dirty, got his in it, had forced his back, down, full, in glove, in, me down, off, on deck, on heart, on the plow, out, over, to mouth, tied, up, hat in, hold, idle, in good, in the palm of his, into his own, Leia, on, Lenda, lift, against, like the back of her, many, near to, on one, on the other, out of, played into there, sat on his, second, shook, slight of, the upper, the whip, through his, up, try one's, upper, weight on, and foot, washed his, of it, well in, with a warm, with one, tied behind her back, with her own fair, ringing there, and I'll just read one more from this book. And I don't usually read this one either, so I'm going to try something a little different with it. This is Two Rams and Goat with Torso and Sheaves of Wheat. Right on. If a flower confesses its shame in a little book, if fire burns only windows and doors, if fruit turns to stone in your hands, if food turns to dust in your mouth, if the things of this world are more or less beautiful than you remembered, if a ram takes the place of the boy in the story, if the ram is loved for the strength and quivering of hindquarters, if voices call out in the wilderness the names and colors of their greatest sins, if color and sound and sin all burn you the same, if fire makes animals tremble in their harnesses, if shame is only a temporary position, if things around you burn to signify their presence, if you become acquainted with flavors of ash, if ash misses the spark that ignited its former body, if you once had a body, but find it changed to something more or less beautiful than you remembered, if the peacocks shake off their feathers, if the ram rakes you over the coals, if your lovers all smell of combustion, if you try to talk with the fire, if you cannot close the book of floral opprobrium, if your hands are separated from your body by a blast, a glance, or their own volition, if your hands are asked to tell everything they know, if your right hand survives each disaster knowing it's lost its left, if your wrists ache with spectral longing for their hands, if your hands are masked and beaten with branches and wild fern, if the boy's music is known to put monsters to sleep, if music hurts its instruments, if hair smokes from both friction and skin flakes each time it's beaten, if our bodies are not behaving the way we trained them, if anything veiled in black is called a monster, if colors outpace us, if stones kick up from the fields and wind licks clean the crops, if wheat threshes itself, if you won't kiss the harvest floor, if you cannot coax back the boy that goat of your hands, if we beat ourselves for the things we have seen and ignored, if we beat ourselves for the more or less beauty of this world, if we beat ourselves for what the left and the right hand know, if we are acquainted with flavors of guilt, if we turn up the shame to a shade of animal rouge, if doors and windows and blasted are opened by fire, if nothing was as we remember it, if earth turns to ash in our mouths, if ash confesses their shame in a little book and we lie down beside them to sleep, if the world and its colors and flames go on around us. So one of the poems from Pomegranate Eater, which Natalie mentioned. I guess I'm a slow writer because I'm going to say the same thing. It took me a really long time to make Pomegranate Eater. But I would say the key ideas behind this book are the ways that we struggle to create an identity for ourselves with and against the identities imposed upon us from others based on what they think of when they first see us, based on their relationships with us, based on the context in which we encounter them, based on our relationships with them. And in many cases, one of the ways that we can construct ourselves is through language. So I guess each poem is a kind of temporary shelter for a construction of self. Self-portrait as radiant host. Ravenous in pelts of prior selves, I step out of my vestments into ravishment. I lay table for my own commensal multitudes. Full length when most aware, armed in offering or pleasure, I could spiral at any moment, shift my fruited baldachin skirt. My guests as much my hostages, my home as much hospice as grove. This is my favorite role, I'll be their server. They come to be near the river, its alliterative languor, call me brookweed, cripple, ghost. They approach to hear what's sibilant in my libent crops. By what prodigal pedigree was I rendered so adorned? It began with a rupture, mistaken for a late descending testis. I turned color from citron to thistle, my skin regimental, never uniform. I brooded, forced to live under a bed, and there I billowed, never learned to contain my mutation. I grew hinge dark, knew rapture as the taste of broken skin. Lean in, I'm not contagious, just hospitable. It's bright here, and everything grows. We're lit from within by systems of exchange. The feast of ingathering is laid. What we love is not the rose, but the smell of its decay. I guess I should have said the title Pomegranate Eater clearly is a reference to the Persephone myth in the story, and I'm sure everyone knows this, but just in case anyone doesn't know it, I'll say that Persephone eats 3 pomegranate seeds while she's in the underworld and then is forced to live in the underworld for 3 months out of the year. So that's definitely in here. But the other aspect of the pomegranate eater that's in here is an allusion to a poem by Rilke in which the speaker tells the tangerine that it needs to learn a more self-protective stance from looking at the pomegranate. So the tangerine is like too available, too delicate, it can just be ripped right into, whereas the pomegranate is wearing what he calls an armor of Cordova leather. An image that appealed to me because there's something so wrong about it, the way that he talks about the pomegranate, but at the same time so right. So there's something in here about building a thicker skin. And one of the ways in which I'm exploring identity in this book is through a series of poems that are basically self-portraits created by talking to different fruit. So the fruit that's being addressed is always just a version of the self, but it's a way of placing it outside. So I'll read a few of those. Quince and Era. Bless me, I am translated somewhere between Hebrew and French, chabouche, a little mouth I'm styled for my delectable exhale. But call me Sidonian Rose, my family does. I come from a dwarfing stock, we keep things short. I'm the last of Aphrodite's deers, I'm wedding luck, I'm hearts. Another bad domesticated fruit, a little tart, packed in, preserved in capucine or copper yellow. Like coins, I wedge. Like coins, I dazzle. Atalanta lost it. Yet for all my bitters I can cure with my astringent seeded smack. Listen, I'm the lion vile that hath here deflowered my dear. I'm evil livid, that lion vile, I meant to say, devoured. Date music. To be pitted, whistled through with wind enough to anchor every anther fleck, the daily drama, heaping time. Do tell of the sharp note doubt makes in the lay, how gold bronze turns tamarack or snuff, how heat's details draw out your sweet debut. Be guileful, dauntless, slight, adroit, regret o'er my jewel, translucent and unknown, curated, handled, hand-picked, from the first your bearings flow. There are also a series of letters in this book in which, once again, the person being addressed is sort of a doppelganger or other version of the person writing the letter. So I'll read a couple of those too. Dear Sor, I'm not avoiding you or your aura of blown salt. I've been eroding your compact language. Horny after our last conversation, I considered your error. You haven't given yourself enough rope. Your character needs danger. The world turns over and falls asleep before we've reached the man annihilated. The word I'd like to see in stanza 6 is arrows. We savor the rare and the sharp and surf so turn with Stilton in summer. Therein the problem with letters or the point. We're severed, unavailable for comment. When we return, our work's been ravished and no one knows. This reader dearly wants to take a risk. Yours, Swerve. Dear Drawn, I climb all night with you on my back, then turn to offer you half my eclair. I found no clarity here, but ease in shifting my joints. I'd like to show you how I pull myself apart. Between one dream and the next I count backward. Dva, Yeden, you, my passport to doubt. In twill or in two, still I introgress a kind of hiding from this double exposure. These days I'm always of two minds. I color more deeply than ever double struck. I found a use for the twine, mastered the twofold fugue and bind. My dual plea be fandomed if you like, but please be felt. We fold in our desires like buried rhymes till each expires. Yours, Worn. And I'll just do one more from this. Pomegranate, Rimon's rhyme. You're nothing but a bad pum, grainy fruit, not poem, a globus berry from which we've garnered garnets, grange, gram, and grenadine. Sometime king in Calyx, sometime cloud or crab, your cultivar's sweet, Phoenician, sad, fleshman, early wonderful, home. From you, grenade and filigree, the embroidery of brighter rills, flesh in cells of granite. Your ripe sound, wrapped, is metallic. Colonel Amaranth, what remains once you've remanded all your ponchoed points? To remind yourself, rename. So for my next trick, let's see if I can get my computer to come up. So I work collaboratively pretty often. I like working with other writers as a way of both supplementing skills that I don't have. Very often, if I want to do something that's technologically inflected, like this project between page and screen that I'm going to share, I don't always have the wherewithal. But I also like working with other writers because I feel like it keeps me honest. It forces me to see things from outside of my very situated perspective, which is something that, as someone who's really steeped in a history of feminism and social justice and post-structural theory, like that's always something I'm thinking about. So the project that I wanted to share with you tonight is called Between Page and Screen. I'm going to just bring this up here. So Between Page and Screen is a book of poems that I created collaboratively with Brad Baus. It is a book that we both wanted to do to kind of explore the relationship between print and digital media at a moment when it really feels like we're being told we have to choose one or the other, like either you're a Kindle person or you're a paperback person, or you're someone who reads on screens or someone who's sort of fetishizing the book as an object you like to hold. And I come from a background of making books by hand, both as a book artist, but also because that's what poets do. Like you print off your poems and you staple them and you hand them to friends. So I didn't feel like I should have to choose between the two. And because my project, or my practice really is about investigating, I thought the best way to sort of answer this question for myself about how I feel about the situation would be to write about it and work through it. So Between Page and Screen is a book of poems that doesn't have any text. Instead, it has these black and white geometric shapes. And the instructions to find the words visit betweenpageandscreen.com. So when the reader does, this is what they see. This is the website. They're prompted to have a copy of the book and their webcam. seeing up there is what I see on my own screen, although it's sized really strangely. Let's see if I just back up. So if I obey the computer and I open up this book in front of it, that's when the poems appear. Dear S, I fasten to become compact, but listen, that's only part your impact. I always wanted, sorry, I got distracted. That's only part your impact. I always wanted to fit a need. It's my character to pin, impinge, a twinge of